Here we are at part 10, the female reproductive anatomy and physiology on page 1039. We're looking at the endometrium of the uterus, which is the interior lining of the uterus. The interior lining of the uterus is where the fertilized egg, which has grown to be a blastocyst and is seeking a place to implant, produce a placenta and become an embryo. That's what the business of this regrowth is on a monthly basis. And so if there is no implantation, then what's going to happen if there is no fertilization, no implantation, then at some point, usually at a pretty predictable point, around 14 days or so after ovulation, these spiral arteries here will contract, and they'll basically cut off the blood supply and cause ischemia in these outer layers. If done very efficiently, then the exfoliation of that tissue proceeds with a certain amount of efficiency. Still, nevertheless, of course, painful, but there is sort of a debriding, as it were, of these tissues, the removal of the tissue. Okay, so this happens over a period of up to 5 days. Hopefully, not all of those 5 days are as intense as one another. And then there is a period of then regrowth, and under the influence of estrogen in the first half of the uterine cycle. So there's a uterine cycle, there's an ovarian cycle, and we look at each of these, and we'll see a graph for all purposes where we sort of mark where everybody is in the 29-day cycle. Usually in that first half of proliferation, we have a somewhat of variable period from the time of menses to the time of ovulation, and it's the second half of that cycle period that is much more often regular and predictable in length. Okay, just to review again, that the uterine wall has an outer surface called a perimetrium. It has a middle region of smooth muscle called a myometrium, and then it also has this, endometrium. And the endometrium itself falls into two general categories. There is the endometrium, which is considered the stratum functionalis, and then there's the stratum basale. The functionalis is that portion which is lost each month. The basale is kept each month, and more to the point, the functionalis is the part that meets the embryo. And we'll see that in the next chapter when we see how the placenta forms from the cooperative efforts of both the fetus, or the embryo initially, and the mom. So there is an interdigitation of structures that is partially made up of chorionic villi from the developing embryo, and then also made from the vessels of the mother, which reach out and interdigitate with the chorionic villi. So we'll take a look at that when we get there. Okay. So here are some of the structures of the perineum, which is defined by this polygon, as it were, right there. This is the bony structure here of the pubic symphysis. Back in this direction, we have the tailbone. We ultimately do have, when we perform pelvic exams prior to pregnancy or childbirth, what we're looking for over in this region would be the ischial spines, to see if there is in fact enough room for the fetal head to pass. So for a four-legged animal, this would not necessarily be a major issue. For a human, this is an extremely major issue because we have very large skulls initially, we have these big brains surrounded by skull, and we have a diminished pelvic floor because we're erect animals that require the weight of our organs to be placed on the pelvic floor. So there is this interesting compromise that becomes created, and the need to examine each woman to determine if there is in fact space. And it's not always because the woman is tall and a large woman necessarily the case that she will also have a birth canal, which is wide open and functional. It could be the smaller woman who, for whatever reason, has that proportion that's larger on her. So we see here we're in the vaginal vestibule. This is referred to as the vestibule. Here we have two labia on each side, a labia minora and majora, between which is the vestibule. We have this little hooded portion here, the prepuce. We have the erectile tissue here, the clitoris, and so on. We have the opening for, at first, in the anterior aspect of the vestibule, we have the opening for the urinary urethra. We have the opening for the vaginal canal. Okay, so this represents the soft tissue region here of the perineum, and we could also say the floor of the pelvis. In the when we studied muscles, we noticed that there was two major muscles in that region, the levator ani and the coccygeus muscles. So just to remember that, here again we look at what could be viewed as erectile tissues. Okay, so